This is just a quick reflection on the testimonies at the Post Office Horizon IT inquiry. This thing I want to talk about has been mentioned a few times in the comments under my other videos, and thank you so much for all your comments. And they're all really lovely, so I really appreciate that. It's been mentioned. This thing's been mentioned, well, quite a lot actually. It's a thing that has people shouting "liar, liar, pants on fire" at their tellies in complete dismay. And what I want to do is give you something else to shout at your telly that might actually be more effective. And yes, shouting at your telly is effective. Trust me, I do it all the time. First off, I'm way behind with my post office videos. I know from the comments that some of you want me to look at Tim Parker. Sorry, Peter Parker's Spider-Man. Tim Parker isn't. Okay, so Tim Parker. I haven't viewed Tim Parker's hearing yet. I will get to it. Work has been really crazy, absolutely bonkers. Yeah, but I'm getting on with things. But some of you have, as well as saying, do a video on Tim Parker, some of you have been referring to this other thing. And it's a more general thing that keeps happening again and again in the inquiry. And it's a thing that some witnesses keep saying in response to questions about their potential wrongdoing. And a lot of us are getting very annoyed about this thing, about the way they're responding, and getting very cynical towards them, including me. When they respond, by saying this thing, we roll our eyes in the back of our heads and we get really annoyed. It's when the witness says something like, "I don't recall, I don't remember, I have no recollection." It comes in various guises, but it's all the same thing, often phrased by lawyers to help their clients avoid self-incrimination, but then borrowed by people who don't have lawyers and are just familiar with its use and think, "Hey, that sounds as though that will get me off the hook," and they use it. I want to take us back to Alice Perkins, because she gave us a perfect example of this when, at the end of her appearance at the inquiry, she was being questioned by Angela Patrick, who's a legal representative for 86 sub-postmasters who were convicted by Post Office Limited and who subsequently had their convictions overturned. Among those sub-postmasters she's representing is Joe Hamilton, the wonderful Joe Hamilton, who was sitting beside her when Perkins was giving her evidence. Patrick began questioning Perkins over an email thread that I think may eventually define the inquiry. It was the email from Paula Venables, CEO of Post Office Limited, about the reporting of the scandal on the BBC One show on December 17th, 2014. And in spite of being sent this email twice, and it being sent by CEO Paula Venables, she says she doesn't remember seeing it. That's a response that can be both accurate. People might not be able to remember, and that's quite reasonable given they are being asked to recall seeing a thing some 10 years ago. But it can also be self-serving. Saying you can't remember seeing it protects you from self-incrimination if there's an expectation that you should have acted differently having seen it. And of course, it can be both things at the same time. And that's why I think we hear it a lot in the inquiry from witnesses who are implicated in wrongdoing. The self-serving aspect is the thing we get annoyed about, but we're stuck because we can't do anything about it because the statement that they can't remember can be reasonably assumed to be true. Sure, it's more than possible that they have forgotten, but it's also self-serving, and they might be saying it because they're lying. And that's when we get grumpy, because we can't say for certain that they're lying. But we often overlook something that can solve this uncertainty, and it gives us something else to infer, and it gives us something we can reasonably infer that might actually do a better job than saying they're lying. And here it is. it's reasonable to assume that they won't be able to remember a thing from 10 years ago if it was a thing that they felt was unremarkable and insignificant. It wouldn't have stood out to them. Wouldn't have stood out to them at the time. And so they forgot it. They might say something like this. I'm really sorry. I don't think I've seen this before. I may have done. I simply don't remember this. Or something like that. But if we replace that with, I probably didn't really care about that thing at the time, then you've snagged them. And let's see if that helps us in relation to Alice Perkins being questioned about that email from Paula Venables, where Venables was so dismissive of, among other things, Joe Hamilton's appearance on The One Show. That was the email where Venables wrote, I was more bored than outraged, and Joe Hamilton lacked passion and admitted false accounting on TV.
Now, she writes to you again, directly copying the whole of that thread, including her message from the last night. She sent you her One Show response on twice. Now, if we can turn back to that original message on page 3, just so we have it in front of us. Did you take issue with what Mrs. Venables was saying?
I'm afraid, I'm really sorry, but I don't think I've seen this before. I may have done, but I simply do not remember this.
We've seen the first, and I've read it out. She was congratulating Mark Davies for a job well done. This was a win she wanted you to see, wasn't it?
It would look like it, yes. It would look like it.
She was saying Mrs. Hamilton lacked passion, sub-postmasters looked inadequate.
Well,
did this simply reflect the attitude that was being adopted by the Post Office leadership team at that time in late 2014 to the campaigning SPMs, the sub-postmasters?
I can't add anything to this, I'm afraid. I mean, it looks, as I've just said, it looks absolutely dreadful given what we know now. And I'm very...
I'm going to stop you there, Miss Perkins.
Sorry.
Not dreadful according to what we know now. Looking back, she sent it to you twice.
She sent it to me twice?
Yeah. She sends it to you on the 17th of December when she copies you in. She sends it to you the next morning with the rest of the thread. Did you have any issue with the language she was using at the time? Can you remember taking it up with her? Oh, Paula, what have you done? Can you remember?
I'm terribly sorry. I simply cannot remember any of this. I do remember the Today programme because I remember hearing it, but I don't remember this.
Is there any written response?
We can't. I haven't found one,
fine.
sir.
Okay, fine.
Joe Hamilton was sat there right at the front of the inquiry with her wonderful, quiet presence, slow roasting witnesses like Perkins. Perkins was reminded that the email was sent to her twice, and Perkins had to admit that it looks absolutely dreadful when looking at it now. What we might reasonably infer from that is that she can't remember it because she didn't think it looked absolutely dreadful at the time. If she had, it would have been shocking to her, and she would have remembered it. Because we remember shocking things. And in this case, it was double shock. Venables sent it to her twice. So essentially, she might be telling us, if she is indeed telling the truth, that she doesn't remember the email, that nothing concerned her about it at the time. I've been in a senior management position, and there were times when I received emails that contained content pointing to the risk of legal or moral jeopardy for someone working for the organisation or for the organisation itself, or for a member of the public. I remember those pieces of text, and I remember what I did in response. I remember meetings where things were reported that raised serious concerns, again regarding legal or moral jeopardy, but also when those reports described absolutely dreadful things. And I know what actions I took. Also, in those instances, I kept contemporaneous notes because that is what you do when situations like that occur, you keep a note because you know it's significant and you need to keep an eye on it. And you may have to refer back to that moment you first saw it or heard it to keep yourself and others accountable for the actions you took. And you'd put those notes somewhere where you know you'll be able to find them at short notice, even if it's years later, because you know that in a complex organisation that things that were done years ago can suddenly catch up with you very quickly and with very little notice. When you're in a senior position, you keep records. It's just what you do. If you're doing your job properly, it becomes instinctual. So this is why I think it's reasonable to infer if someone's in a senior position like Perkins, and they claim to have been acting professionally at all times, well, if they can't recall a thing that happened that later turns out to have put someone in moral or legal jeopardy, and have no note or recollection of that thing happening, then you can certainly infer that they didn't pay much attention to it at the time, or else that they weren't doing their job properly. We hear the response from some senior executives that had they known at the time that such and such a thing was a problem, they would have done something about it. That points out that they made poor judgment at the time, and that's likely why they didn't see it as a problem, and might now explain why they can't recall much or anything about it. And that might give us something else to shout at the TV other than liar, liar, pants on fire, when we hear someone saying they can't recall a thing, when that thing is absolutely dreadful, that's doing harm to someone like a sub-postmaster like Joe Hamilton. And that something else is something I'll package up for you right now into a nice little pithy phrase that you can shout at the TV. When they say, "I don't recall," you shout back, "You didn't care." In fact, I kind of think that maybe that's what Joe Hamilton's stare is shouting out at those witnesses, like Perkins. That composed way that she sits patiently, silently skewering so many of those witnesses with her stare. Can you see it there, in her eyes? I think she's shouting back at Perkins, "You didn't care." And if that's what she was doing, I think she was doing right. Okay, that's all for now. If you like this one, hit the subscribe button, like button, notify button, all the buttons you can find. It helps make these videos visible to the public, and I don't make money off of this stuff. Yeah, I'm not in it for the profit. Unlike Post Office Limited, I just make these to try to contribute to the public discourse. Okay, so thanks for watching. See you next time. Ta-da.